leadership of the university present here today, the deans of faculties, HODs, professors in our midst, our special colleagues from Mozambique. Good afternoon to you all, protocol observed. I'm trying to see if my slide is projected today. My talk today is on Ubuntu pedagogy, transforming educational practices in South Africa through an African philosophy from theory to practice. Yes, my name is Nomalungelo Ngubane. This is the content of my presentation. In the first slide, I will do the introduction. In the second slide, I will unpack Ubuntu philosophy. In the third slide, I will draw from literature to discuss the guiding principles of Ubuntu philosophy. And then I will attempt to discuss critiques of Ubuntu philosophy. And then I will delve into Ubuntu pedagogy, looking at Ubuntu pedagogy as a transformative pedagogical approach. And before I conclude, I will discuss implication for practice. This is a paper in the making, colleagues, so your feedback is welcome to make this presentation or the paper very good for publication in the near future. In this presentation, I argue that education in South Africa and Africa at large, it is continuously underpinned by European pedagogical philosophies. This is despite that our continent, Africa, is very rich in African indigenous philosophies, such as Ubuntu philosophy. Scholars such as Goduga, Mbeki, and Letega, they are of the view that African indigenous philosophies and knowledge systems, such as Ubuntu, can be used as teaching approaches that is culturally relevant to students in Africa and elsewhere. At the same time, Mwanga Zake argues that European indoctrination through the colonial education system in Africa has socialized our young people out of their indigenous values and knowledge system. Musina also observed with concern that institutions in Africa, they continue to function from a Eurocentric view, which continuously undermines and dismisses African indigenous philosophies such as Ubuntu as a false assumption and illegitimate African thinking. Scholars such as Bangura and Pasha, they also argue that a fundamental objective of an educational institution must be to safeguard the development and restoration of heritage and cultures of the people it serves. Similarly, global scholars such as Blackwood, 2018, also assert that institutions should promote an education that will acquaint, restore, reconnect students with their indigenous value system. In this presentation, I also argue that the rejection of our African indigenous knowledge systems such as Ubuntu could be the main reason why it has not filtered in our education system and curricula in South Africa and in Africa at large. So in this presentation today, I also draw from recent literature by scholars such as Omodon and Diko 2021 and others who argue that there is no complete transformation and decolonization of education in Africa without the restoration and recognition of indigenous heritages of the African people. In the following slide, I will then unpack Ubuntu philosophy. But before I get there, in this presentation, I also argue for Ubuntu philosophy, which is an indigenous teaching approach that draws from Ubuntu pedagogy as a transformative pedagogy for institutions in Africa. In this slide, I will unpack Ubuntu philosophy. But before I do that, I would like to declare that in this slide, I use Ubuntu philosophy and Ubuntu interchangeably. Scholars such as Brudrake, they argue that it is not easy to encapsulate the African philosophy of Ubuntu into a definite meaning. This is because its understanding is derived from a concrete context in which it thrives. He further argues that any attempt to standardize a definition of Ubuntu philosophy into a particular definition will destroy its essence. Having said that, okay, there's a slide. Having said that, literature provides various understandings of Ubuntu philosophy from politicians, from global scholars, from community leaders, all providing various interpretations and perspectives of Ubuntu. For example, Bengo 2006 argues that Ubuntu is an African indigenous way of life, a practice born of kinship culture, of collective solidarity. Ramos as well put forward that in African cultures, Ubuntu is regarded as a capacity to express humanity, compassion, solidarity, respect, and mutual caring. Furthermore, Brudrake argues that respecting fellow human beings, respecting human beings brings about harmony and peace, so it makes it easy to share, cooperate, and coexist. Ubuntu is derived from the word umuntu, a Nguni word for a human being. This word is also available in other languages, both in South Africa and elsewhere. In ancient African societies, human beings lived together among other human beings to form a family, a community, or a society. It is within those communal living spaces that the hardship of life among indigenous ancient people taught them the survival skills. They soon learned that hunting together is better than hunting alone. They realized that it is better to catch a prey when they hunt as a group than hunting as individuals. So it is within this collective existence versus individual value that promoted teamwork, cooperation, solidarity, sharing of food among people, sharing of farming tools and knowledge to survive. And it gave rise to a very famous maxim, umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu. My being is tied to your being. I am because you are. It is also important to emphasize that the concept of Ubuntu is not exclusively African. The practice of cooperation, solidarity, sharing of food, and all those is also available, or it can be found in other parts of the world, such as Asia, Latin American countries, Southern Europe, and so on, where Europe's scepticism based on individualism and exclusivity thrives less. And I will also now move to the tenets of Ubuntu. Literature provides various elements or values which makes Ubuntu philosophy thrives in different contexts. Different scholars, they put forward that Ubuntu's philosophy will thrive where there is an element of solidarity, coexistence and interdependence, cooperation and sharing, compassion or kindness, respect and dignity among people. Here I would like to attempt to provide a critique of Ubuntu philosophy. In recent years, different scholars have put forward some critique of Ubuntu philosophy. For example, Matolino and Quindingwi, they argue that Ubuntu as a philosophy and a recommended way of life has reached its life or its end in the modern Africa. These scholars, they insist that its relevance can only serve a small group of people or a close-knit community, as opposed to large-scale African societies, as it is often claimed. While Ubuntu philosophy speaks about the values of sharing, respect, and compassion, on the other side, contemporary African society is doomed with greed, disrespect, intolerance, and indifference. Ubuntu hardly exists among African societies now or in the future, says the scholars. Furthermore, scholars such as Lowe 2006 argues that the African continent is highly occupied by corruption, mismanagement and self-enrichment, disease and poverty. As a result, Ubuntu has been eroded, especially among the African societies. It is a contradiction to state that in a society supposedly ingrained in Ubuntu and humanitarian values of Ubuntu, homelessness, joblessness are both in the increase in our government systems. It is also strange to speak of Ubuntu and humanity in the context of the oppression of people globally, the senseless killings of human beings by other human beings, as well as acts of xenophobia in African countries, while the survival among humanity is being threatened by exploitation of one economic class by the other. And while I'm at that point, I will also draw from what the keynote speaker today in the morning alluded to, the killings of people living with albinism. The question will be, where is Ubuntu when we do not see a human being among those people living with albinism? Also, some scholars such as Hlatshwayo and Ngumalo, they also highlight violence in schools. Learners are killing each other in the schools. They disrespect teachers who are their adults in the context of the school. They also argue that Ubuntu, they believe that it has come to an end in our modern Africa. Notwithstanding these critiques that I've provided, in this presentation, I propose for the viability or the potential of Ubuntu philosophy, which draws from the values of Ubuntu as a transformative pedagogy that can cultivate and restore the lost African indigenous value system in our educational settings. Then I come to Ubuntu pedagogy. There is no singular definition of Ubuntu pedagogy, but recently a number of scholars has been interested in exploring the concept of Ubuntu. Some they call it Ubuntu Goji. I call it Ubuntu pedagogy. For example, in recent years, in 2021, South African scholars such as Omodon and Digwe, they argue that Ubuntu pedagogy is a teaching strategy that emerges from the values of Ubuntu. At a global level, scholars such as Blackwood, they believe that Ubuntu pedagogy is a humanizing approach to teaching and engaging students in the learning process. It also affirms, validates, and treats students as dignified human beings, regardless of their race or class. I also would like to add what Letega, our famous scholar of Ubuntu philosophy, says about Ubuntu pedagogy. He says that teachers and students recognize one another and as co-creators of knowledge within an Ubuntu pedagogy classroom. One is not complete without the meaning contribution of the other. Umuntu, ungomuntu, ngabantu. Other scholars, they also see Ubuntu pedagogy as an inclusive pedagogy, which cultivates the values of cooperation, sharing, solidarity, coexistence, and respect. Am I still within time? Okay. I particularly took this from the recent scholars of Ubuntu pedagogy, Omodon Digwe and others. They say that Ubuntu pedagogy, based on the values of Ubuntu, provides freedom and flexibility in learning environments, enhancing students' creativity, independence, and freedom to explore or innovate while they share, cooperate, and specifically use their local indigenous languages instead of European languages. Before I run out of time, I will look at Ubuntu pedagogy as a transformative pedagogy. Literature argues that for Ubuntu pedagogy to be implemented effectively in the classroom, it should be anchored by the following 6 principles that make it viable. Firstly, understanding of self and others in the context of diversity. I am because you are. Building positive relationship, getting the student and teachers to work together, teaching from the position of love and care and kindness, utilizing students' linguistic resources to promote meaningful learning. Here I draw from what the famous scholar on Ubuntu translanguaging, Makalela, 2016, he talks about the utilization of our indigenous languages as resources or powerful resources for assisting the understanding and learning among especially multilingual students in African context. What are the implications of Ubuntu pedagogy for practice? Here, I propose for a way forward, and then I conclude. I argue that teaching and learning from the perspectives of African philosophy of Ubuntu has the potential to preserve our indigenous knowledge systems, beliefs, and values while it promotes diversity. It also promotes understanding of selves in the context of others. It encourages good relationship and consistency among students and their teachers, and promote cooperation among students as opposed to destructive, competitive, individual, and exclusive learning cultures that draws from Eurocentric pedagogies. I also argue that it also embrace and reclaim the pedagogies that are based on African value system for our institutions in Africa. I thank you all.
Okay, I think we can give Dr. Ngubane a louder and a rounder set of applause, right? Come, let's go. Okay. Sorry. All right, I'm not quite sure. Does anybody have any burning questions? I see one hand. I see two hands. I don't think we can take too many questions, right? Because Professor Rafapa, are we introducing the guest speaker at 3? Prof? At 3, what time?
Prof, the papers scheduled for 3 would have to be deferred until after the keynote by Dr. Loza.
We get to the key, introduction at 3.
Not the program unfurls as is. Let me get there quickly. All we are doing is to clear the space between 15 hours and 15:20.
Okay, thank you. All right. So I had 3 hands, right? 1 hand, 2 hands, and 1 right in the back. All right, so let's go. First, second, third. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Madam. Let me, I've heard the way you actually phrase the issue of Ubuntu, and you actually go to say that it doesn't have a subtle definition for itself, and I actually would concur with you because Professor Ramose agrees to that. But we have a similar problem with Ramose when it comes to people saying that Ubuntu therefore is irrelevant or non-existent because of that. Because there is a Western philosophy, existentialism. It suffers from the same. And they don't say a thing about it. They accept it as it is. It's been embraced by scholars from America and Europe and other places with that kind of a situation. But they don't say a thing about it being irrelevant because of that. So there seems to be some element of racism or something. I wish to hear your view on that one. The second part is actually those scholars like my supervisor, Dr. Bernard Matolino, who say that Ubuntu have died. They don't bother about what has killed it. But now, in this case, I want to refer to the famous that Dr. Bernard Matolino would actually say to you if you meet him in person. He will say, do you consider it to be Ubuntu when we meet because there's a problem? For example, on the pandemic like COVID-19, people tried to form this solidarity, and somebody would say, that is where the instantiation of Ubuntu has occurred. So do you accept that to be an instantiation of Ubuntu, or it's something else of solidarity like in the Western concept, as Matolino would say? Thank you.
Let's go, we'll take all the questions and... Sorry, Norman, you next, thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't really believe in, I don't know whether to call it concept definition. Because what do we mean by definition? Is it definite? It can. At the moment, I can say this is like this. Next year I can say this. It keeps on changing. Then it becomes a constitutive meaning of a particular concept or a term, but not a definition. Secondly, I don't know whether to put it as a question. Is Ubuntu, can you associate Ubuntu with social justice? Or is Ubuntu an extension of social justice which is taken to be above social justice? because we can talk about equality, inclusion, equity, interaction, where people are included, compassion, hospitality, when we debate. And it goes further to look at a group of people, more communitarian than individualistic when you look at social justice.
Okay. Thanks, Norman. My colleague right in the back, thank you. My colleague right in the back had his hand up. You want to ask a question, or can we, let's respond, okay, in the meantime. I'll let Dr. Ngobane respond to the two comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. At the beginning of my presentation, I did mention that this is a proposal that I'm planning to submit as a scholarly paper in the future. It looks like a keynote, colleagues. It is not a keynote, but I'll try, and what you have raised now actually is enhancing my thoughts around this paper that I'm presenting today. So I will attempt to answer or respond to your questions by saying that I did allude to my presentation that some scholars, they do acknowledge that Ubuntu has come to an end, but other scholars such as Brudrake, they actually think that Ubuntu still exists, even though we can argue that it still exists in smaller close-knit communities where the exchange is based on the need for Ubuntu, like you said. So I would like to meet scholars such as Maltino, because I've read so much from him when he responds to Brudrake about, does Ubuntu still exist? Has it come to an end? To what extent can we say there is still Ubuntu in our community, or it still exists? But thank you very much for highlighting that. It will definitely come through in my upcoming paper. I will go to Professor over there, who also said that there's no definite definition or concrete definition of Ubuntu. I did mention that in some of my slides earlier on, to say that scholars say that there is no concrete definition of Ubuntu because it exists in a context where it thrives. So there's no particular definition, like you rightfully said, that it continuously applies, and as it continuously applies, we think more about the context, about the content. Thank you very much for raising that. Yes, the scholars such as Ramos and others, including you, Professor, now you've just mentioned that it evolves as it is used, or as it applies in our real life situation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other questions? All right, I see one hand. There's my colleague right in the back. He's putting his hand up again. All right, but no problem. I'll take two questions. All right, it's fine. First question from this side. Next. Thank you.
Is it? Oh, okay.
Thank you so much, Prof. My question is going to be a little bit controversial, some form of an entanglement of some sort. The reason why I'm saying this is because I see that we have got officials from the correctional services here in the country. And I want to talk about Ubuntu as reflected in institutions like those, because my belief is that such an institution, it is a form of a teaching and learning of some sort wherein behaviors are corrected. So now, my question is, should we accept, or do we accept that Ubuntu practices, in other words, Ubuntu teaching and learning in the form of correcting these behaviors, it's also, or should it be also applicable in institutions such as correctional services, given the fact that the understanding is these are institutions wherein they are not keen on punishing but instead on correcting behaviors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. This is not a question, but more of a comment, or hoping to maybe to get the speaker to go back to the question that was asked: is Ubuntu an extension of social justice or a complement? But let me look at it from my lens as a law scholar to say, I would first move from the point that I look at it as an extension or a complement, to the concept of the Western concept of social justice rather than a direct equivalent. Because my reason being that if you treat it as a direct equivalent, then you end up, as it is now been seen, having Ubuntu or practices being sort of consumed by this, and we tend to forget about it. So if equivalent is basically to say that now the social justice as we know is incomplete, it is inadequate, and therefore you need a standalone concept or movement for that. Thank you.
Okay, there's a comment. Okay, go, Prof.
Okay, no problem.
Thanks, Professor Singh and Dr. Ngubane. Mine is not a question, it's just a comment. Isn't it, as you rightly said, we're here to enrich each other, we're here to evolve the presentations into possible accredited peer-reviewed publications. The challenges expressed by colleagues on the slipperiness or the intractability of Ubuntu, perhaps as a concept, can be circumvented by an approach people normally adopt in tracing a concept that is not seen as already having contours, a clear delimitation or profundity, content. Usually the starting point would be to ask yourself, in writing, what writers did write early on Ubuntu? You go to those writers. Agrit Laste, the former editor of the World newspaper, has written a lot about Ubuntu. He's not the only one. Then you can use the search words that you find in his writings, because they will fall within the accoutrement or the arsenal of ideas around Ubuntu. Same way one would not try and consolidate the rainbow nation, the idea of a rainbow nation, without going to Desmond Tutu. So it helps, to say, when you glean through a published work, who has written or said something substantial on Ubuntu as a starting point, then it can develop from there. It can develop from there until perhaps it gets canonized in the league of accepted ideas or even philosophies several decades later, when we are dead and our grandchildren are professors, and so on and so on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think that you have said a mouthful. Let me go back to Prof there, who also asked me earlier on if I do accept Ubuntu philosophy as a moral theory. I think it also speaks to what my colleague said there. Is it applicable in correctional services as it will apply in just a normal classroom? I will respond by saying that thank you for those questions. Like Prof said, that they make me go back to this proposal, because when I started this presentation, I did say that my interest on Ubuntu philosophy is its potential or viability for it to be used in educational context. But what you raised, colleagues, today, it does make me go back and read a lot around Ubuntu philosophy and in other diverse contexts, and then maybe streamline it to how it can be applicable in an educational context. I do thank you very much for your scholarly review. Thank you very much. Thank you, Prof.
Okay, do we have one last question? Right, Norman?
Thank you. It's not really a question. Maybe to my colleague and friend that side, who spoke about correctional services and all those things. I don't know, what do we call this, the time and the situation where the offender, because the correctional services, they make arrangement where the offender go and meet the offended. I think you know about it. Is it not part of Ubuntu? So that they can forgive each other? I'm not saying you answer it, but they do have that time where the offender, maybe you kill somebody, you rape somebody, they arrange when they are doing whatever in Makado or wherever, where the offender go and meet the family of the people they've killed or they've done 1, 2, 3. Then they sit down and talk. I don't know how can we classify that. Then lastly, yes, we can read a lot. I was taught that you read a lot when you identify the literature you're going to use to write. Then you pick very few, but you do a lot of thinking when you do the writing. That's why some people, when they write about a topic, they don't look at a book or an article. They write, they know what they want to write. Then they write and write and write 15 pages. From there, they go and look for the books which are talking about this area, this area. Then you avoid the whole process of plagiarism.
Okay, thank you very much. There's one question, last question I'm going to.
Thank you. My question is that, is the Ubuntu concept still applicable? Is the Ubuntu concept still applicable in African societies? Because now we learn that an individual can exploit others in the name of Ubuntu practice. For example, we'll have a worker looking for cheap laborers in the name that they wanna apply the Ubuntu concept and assist them. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I will respond to Prof. There who said that we need to read a lot around the concept and think more about it. The scholars that I cited today are the scholars that actually, I believe, support me, because I've written about Ubuntu. It might not be many papers, but I have also cited other scholars who have also cited me. So this is not my first work on Ubuntu. And one of my papers are cited almost every month around Ubuntu. So this is the extension of that. It's not that I am plagiarizing people. I did not use my citation a lot because it will sound like I'm praising for the work. But the scholars that I cited today, those are the scholars who also cite me every month. So I'm building from this as well to expand this new work that I'm proposing around Ubuntu in educational practices. But thank you very much for your comment, Prof. Thank you very much. To the young person over there, does Ubuntu still apply in our society? I think that I've touched on that. Citing some scholars, they say that Ubuntu has come to an end in our modern life society. And if it still exists at all, it exists for the purpose of saving a particular need. As I think that as a young person, it comes from a lot of realities around us. Whether do we see Ubuntu in our educational institution? Do we see Ubuntu back in the schools from where we come from and in our society? I think that some scholars in the house have said that if it still exists at all, it exists to some extent to serve a particular purpose, not that Ubuntu as we draw from the ancient African indigenous people who will practice Ubuntu not only for the sake of self-gain, self-enrichment, and exploiting other people and so on. I think that that's how I'll respond to your question. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Norman, I'm going back to Dr. Kakana. All right. And sorry, Prof. Sitole, I see the dignitaries are not here as yet. All right. Thanks, Norman. Dr. Kakana.
Just to, I thought maybe we would sort of, because we have, as I said, of correctional services here, would give them a bite of that, because I wanted to find out if in their practices, as and when they are correcting behaviors of these offenders, from the aspect of teaching and learning, do they also feel like Ubuntu can be applied, or is it being applied? Because remember, as I said, my belief is that it's an institution which has got some remnants of teaching and learning in its own, creation. So perhaps maybe if we give them a bite just to sort of get a sense of, not to put them on the spot.
Prof. Maoto.
It's 2 minutes past 3. USA time.
Thank you very much, but I was waiting for, I don't see the dignitaries here. That's why I posed aloud the questions. Thanks.
And maybe get this is a perspective from colleagues from correctional services. If our time still allows, or we can engage them out of this platform. Okay, thank you very much.
Chairperson, if one may come in. We have guests, and sometimes we should say there will be time to interact with them, so that they also come well prepared, like our guest there. And I think Prof. Kekana will not be opposed to that, so that we give them time to prepare as well. Ubuntu is becoming a complex term, and there's no agreement among scholars anyway. So let's give them time, go and prepare. More of agreement with them. We are still going to interact with them in many other ways. So can we put a comma there? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, we are ready, and I'm going to ask Professor Sitole to come and introduce our guest speaker. Right, who's going to, right, Professor Sitole? I think he's gone out. All right, you saw I was being diplomatic, so while I was trying to make sure we still pose questions, right, the Deputy Minister is on his, there we go. Welcome, sir. Thank you. All right, I'm going to ask, as the Deputy Minister takes his seat, I'll ask Professor Sitole to introduce our keynote speaker for this afternoon. Right, and then he will, Professor Ntombela will follow thereafter. Thank you very much. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Ladies and gentlemen, I would love you to start by clapping hands for yourself for being such a wonderful audience thus far. I have the advantage of not going through protocol again, as this was done earlier today, but I also have the responsibility to introduce to you our guest speaker, Dr. Wagdi Loza. But before I do that, allow me to make a few announcements to the effect of amending our program slightly to accommodate the changes that occurred in the interim. I will introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Wagdi Loza, and afterwards we will grant the speaker to share with you whatever he has from Canada. Immediately after that, we are going to ask the Deputy Minister, the Honorable Inkosi Pategile Holomisa, to thank the guest speaker or to respond to his presentation. And then thereafter, we're going to have an interaction, questions and answers and comments. So, without ado, let me execute the mandate. Dr. Wagdi Loza, his research area is in psychology. Beside his current appointments with 5 universities, he is also a retired chief psychologist from the Correctional Service of Canada. He is the ex-president of the board of directors for the St. Lawrence Association for Young Offenders in Ontario. He is also the founder of the Terrorism section of the Canadian Psychological Association. His experience spans approximately 43 years in correctional or forensic fields. He is currently a member of the Ontario Review Board. He has widely published in the area of predictable violent recidivism among correctional forensic populations and in terrorism of the Middle Eastern ideology or origin. He has developed the self-appraisal questionnaire, a tool for predicting violent offender recidivism. Apart from that, I think the university prides itself in the fact that Dr. Loza is also a research associate of the University of Limpopo. And this we were able to get around ever since we got to know him and we noticed that he would add value to the pursuit and the struggle to find answers and solutions for the mother continent of Africa. Dr. Loza is also going to share with you his paper titled The Use of the Self-Appraisal Questionnaire in Predicting Violent and Non-Violent Recidivism of Incarcerated Mentally and Non-Mentally Disordered Offenders. I want to believe that the link is fine, and we can have Dr. Loza on. Just as they are trying to sort out the connectivity, I will amend the program slightly again by virtue of the powers vested in me. I'll ask Professor Bakhazen to say a little more about Dr. Loza's research and research profile. Over to you, sir.
In absentia, Professor Matlom Khalong, Professor Jessica Singh, Professor Richard Madache, Honorable Nkosi Sango Patekile Holomisa, the Deputy Minister in the Department of Justice and Correctional Services, Mr. S. Makhoti Tubakale, National Commissioner, Mr. Sichaba Mphahlele, Regional Commissioner, Regional Commissioner, not national, pardon me, Professor Matthias Chabali, our keynote speaker from Savi University, Dr. Wegdi Loza, our keynote speaker from Canada, who will be joining us now before long at 3:30. That's the arrangement. Technology is ready for that. Yet, we cleared the space between 15 hours and 15 hours 30. Originally, the introduction was planned for 15 hours 20, which means it would have taken 10 minutes before the keynote by Dr. Loza. But we had a plan up our sleeve. We knew why we cleared the space between 15 hours and 15 hours 30. We are now announcing the tweaking of the program, a slight tweak. And the tweak is, after Dr. Loza would have given the keynote, the Honorable Deputy Minister will have a word for Dr. Loza. That is the trick. We know that usually someone else, I don't want to mention who, someone else thanks the keynote speakers, but the program will unfold and the Deputy Minister will be called upon in proper order. Also, we wanted to use this gap between 15 hours and 15:30 when the technology then brings to us Dr. Loza, so that instead of charting the route for day 2 after the keynote, we have it now. We have reasons. You'll recall that before lunch, there are papers that had to be packed because they were colliding with lunch. And there were also papers that were supposed to be presented from 15 hours to 15 hours 20. So all those papers will now take place, will now be presented after Dr. Loza has given the keynote. Now, charting the route for day 2, there is not much in terms of perhaps the program changing. There is just one thing that we have to put on record about tomorrow. It's a tweak again, and it is that after the keynote, you will notice that tomorrow we have not keynote, main paper from 11:50 to 12:30 by our friend from Savi University in Mozambique, Mr. Mira de Jesus Varela Kanhanga. Now, you will see that from 12:30 here in R40 is a plenary. We were going to have a way forward at 12:50. There is a change now. At 12:30, we shall have a guest, a dignitary from the Department of Correctional Services, making a comment from DCS on the spring lectures as a whole. Remember that tomorrow we break at lunch, and after breaking for lunch, we then disperse to freshen up for the gala dinner at 17 hours. So this is the order now, as it will unravel. We're at 15:16, and we're just waiting for the 15:30 so that we get into the keynote. Those are the slight changes. Thank you, delegates.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like you to applaud Dr. Loza before he starts. Over to you, sir.
Mr. Finlandi, can I hear the speaker on here, on Zoom?
Can you hear us, Prof. Loza?
Can I hear the speaker now on Zoom?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, then we can hear you. You can hear us. You may start, Prof.
Okay, just let me know when I start.
You can start. You may start.
Up to the presentation now?
Yes, you may.
Okay, so I'll get out of here.
Yes. Yes. I can hear you. That's what you want to do.
1 second. Okay, to start?
If you're ready, Prof, you may start.
Okay. Good afternoon, introduce you today, I would like to thank Professor Rafaba and Professor Moaru for inviting me to this conference. I would also like to thank Professors Brackhosen and Hissling for inviting me to participate in today's presentation. I visited South Africa in 2007 and presented a workshop about violent recidivism. I really have fond memories of this visit, and I like the unique culture of the rich South African culture. Without further ado, I'm going to start talking about the SAG and its use. If you have any question, feel free to ask at the end of the presentation. Unfortunately, I cannot see you. I hope that you can see me. Now, I will start with introductory comments. And as you see in front of you, the variable associated with predicting violent recidivism. Yes, we are talking about the SAG, but it is important to know the background of the SAG and how it was done. I'm going first to talk about the list of static and dynamic variables, and then the history of risk need assessments. And build on his release, all of this considered an antisocial personality. You don't need him to take other program that is irrelevant to his needs. Again, if he scored from 3 to 6, assigned to counseling to explore area of criminal involvement. Again, to consider program assignment for, according to SAC, from 4 to 8, you place him in a facility run substance abuse program. Don't put him in an institution which does not have a program for substance abuse. If you want to treat him, if you want to help him, if you want to release him to the community after you have helped him with program. Now, as we said before, what the SAC can be used for? This is the if we are compatible with other tools that predict violent and non-violent. Some of these tools don't predict violent, but they predict non-violent. Anyway, or both of them, we find that the SAC is compatible with them and as active as this tool. The difference is that the SAC is more economical, you save time, it doesn't need high professional training to use them, and I'll talk about that now. Also, the SAC can be used with diverse population, violent, non-violent, female, young offender, psychiatric population, and I will give you evidence of that later on this presentation. Again, the research that we did with that in Canada, USA, Australia, South Africa, Spain, Singapore, and European countries, England and Spain. So anyway, I didn't write Spain in here, but European, England, Spain, and all of that. Why use the SAC? It is convenient, it is so quick to do. All that you have to do, you get the guy this, you sit in front of him, you don't even have to explain anything more than just read the statement and check if it is true or false. If he cannot read, you have to read it for him. It takes only 15 to 20 minutes. Other skill can take hours and take professionals to do it at sometimes PhD level or at least master's degree to do it. Not everybody can do other skill like the psychopathy checklist. Again, with minimal training of 1 or 2 days, the person can be competent to complete this. We talked about how important the dynamic risk need factors when I presented them at the beginning of my presentation. The SAC include large portion of dynamic value. It could be administered individually or in groups, and that's a strength. Other tools, no, you have to do it individually. Interpreting the results require minimal effort. As I told you before on the scale, what is so hard by counting this and put the number at the bottom, counting this and put the number at the bottom, and then you count all of them together, take 5 minutes to do, and they give you results. Now, some response could be used for treatment planning and diagnosis. Treatment planning, if I am coming across with antisocial belief, antisocial feeling, antisocial attitude, which the scale can pick this up very quickly, then you assign them to treatment program which deal with this antisocial feeling, beliefs, and all of that. You can make a diagnosis out of this if antisocial personality disorder. Although I encourage you not to do that unless you are qualified diagnosis. You don't say diagnosis because it is restricted to psychiatrists and psychologists who have this privilege to diagnose. But you can say that scale have shown that he is, for example, look like antisocial personality disorder. Why maximal objectivity? Because you are not intervening, you are not saying your opinion, you are not saying anything. You say the scale said this, it is not you, so it is very objective. Now, could be used without reliance on other tools. Some of the other tools would require you to complete another risk need assessment. For example, the psychopathy checklist. You need to, the VLAG, you need to complete the psychopathy checklist to be able to complete the VRAG, which is Violent Risk Need Assessment. With the SAC, you don't need to rely on any other tools. It has no negative label. With the psychopathy checklist, you can say he's psychopath and all that. There is no need to give labels, particularly negative, humiliating labels. As I told you before, level of risk are 4. 42 high, moderate to high, 11 to 20, low to moderate, less than 11, that's low risk. And if you recall earlier in the presentation when we said, when it is low risk, you don't need to assign to programs, assign to minimum security institution, and all of that. How to report the result of that SAC? Just to read this. And that's when you report the result of the SAC in your report. For sure your report will include historical background and other information that you have. Now I'm going to talk about the reliability and validity of the SAC. You do not want to use a tool which is not found to be reliable and valid. Reliability simply means that every time you do the scan, you get the same result. Every time we use this and they tell you 5-inch or 2-inch or 3-inch, give you the same result. And that's what reliability means. Validity, does the test measure what is supposed to be designed for or made for? And that's most important for any risk need assessment tool. And that's what I will show you now in the results we got from 27 years of applying or researching the SAC. I'm going to present you with results from your own country, South Africa. And it was done by Dr. Hesling and Brinslow. Both are extremely, very good, high professional professors. And in this study, they used a sex offender and the SAC. Guess what? The SAC, which take 20 minutes to do, was the same results that included in intensive and lengthy interviews. The second research by Dr. Brinslow and Hesling. Again, they applied the SAC to South Africans. That's what they come up with. Robust, highly significant test reliability. Quotation for the various SAC subscales. The SAC is valid for use with potential SAC gang member. This is very important because now you're targeting a specific population. And actually, I don't have any other research that addressed gang population. So this study was very valuable to us. And then they included these statements. The third research by Dr. Hesling and Dr. Brinslow was on female, 284 females offenders. they were convicted of color of non-violent and violent. Participants were colored, Asian, white. The results again confirm the reliability and validity. When you use each study and each confirm the reliability and validity, that add extra credit to that tool. So you are not using it and say, brag about it because you want it to promote it. No, you have independent people who are saying that, and that's the most important. Now, if you look in here, the results from South Africa was comparable to results that we got from Pennsylvania and Singapore study. This is very important because it is cross-cultural. Also, the third research, there was no significant difference between Africans, colored, Asian, white, based on the SAC. And then they came up with this conclusion, which is the SAC is applicable to female and female offenders. That's good news. Again, the statistics of their research was comparable or consistent with research which was done previously in Pennsylvania and Singapore. Again, they talk about the reliability and validity of the SAC. So they stress the fact that the tool is reliable and valid for use with South African offenders. Now I'm going to bore you with some statistics, and basically the 2 years follow-up study, whereby we apply the SAC, the guy go out, and we look after 2 years, we follow up all the offenders who have been released after completing the SAC and released for 2 years. So the correlation between the score, the total score of the SAC, I didn't give you the subscale score because it's not necessary. So the correlation between parole violation, recidivism, coming back to jail, violent act, any failure was this. Very high correlation, and what you look for is this. It is statistically significant beyond 0.001. If you are a statistician, you feel very happy when you get this 0.001. So it is high correlation. Now, I'm going to give you this graphs in here, and I'll explain it. Basically, again, it is the same study of 2 years follow-up, and the probability of parole violation in here, recidivism in here, any failure here, violent act in here. The more you score on act and SAC, the more you're going to be, the offender will get back or commit violent recidivism. And medium and low, these are the terms we use to say high, medium, low, and according to the SAC score, high, medium, low, SAC score, and you see how the higher the SAC score, the higher the probability that he will commit violent act, and that's good for the validity of the scale. 5 years follow-up in Canada Again, but that's a different criteria. Look in here, look in here. If you look previous, you see criteria: parole violation, recidivism, violent act, any failure. Here, new offense, and then again violent act, recidivism, any failure. This is 5 years follow-up. Then we did that on psychiatric patient. We have in prison a hostel for psychiatric patients. They are offenders and they are psychiatric patients. The difference between psychiatric and general population was the same, but here, look at here, that's the correlation between recidivism, violent recidivism, violent general recidivism, any failure or new sentence with the SAC score. This is psychiatric hospital. This is general population. So you can see that the SAC could be used with psychiatric patients. 6 years follow-up. So I am boring you with 2, 5, 6, 7, 9 to show I want to be satisfied that the tool is valid, predictively valid. Predictive validity is the most important aspect of any validity. Again, I don't need to go back again to explain this, but probability of violent acts, high, moderate, low, according to the offender score on the SAC. So here is a comparison with other tools. By the way, the statistic I am giving you is just 1/10 of the statistics that we have, but I can't present every statistic on research we did. I'm just giving you couple and the easiest one to understand, particularly for non-psychologists or for from the people who are out of the correctional field. This is violent recidivism, this is general recidivism, this is level of supervisor inventory, this is psychopathy checklist, this is violent risk assessment. You see, the SAC is higher than that, than all of them. And here is another fancy way to express the predictive validity of the SAC, 7 years follow-up, and you see the SAC score in here, and the SAC in here. For violent recidivism, SAC came better than the other tools. For violent recidivism, SAC came much better than other tools. A 9 years follow-up study. Again, look at here, only here. The correlation, 0.38, the correlation here for violent, 0.38. Don't worry about yes and no. These are the people who committed violent act, and these are the people who did not commit violent act. And I did what we call t-test to compare between them. But what do you care about for now? The high R score, which is correlation score. Again, the same thing was 9 years follow-up. Here is probability with violent act according to SAC score. SAC score high, medium, low, and the probability of recidivism in terms of months, risk in months. Now, I'm giving you comparison between the SAC total score and subscale. Remember when I told you about the 7 subscales that you have in the SAC? Now, correlation between these subscales, that's subscales, and total scale. Australia, Canada, England, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Singapore. And I don't think I have the results from South Africa in here. Again, I don't want to present this table because it's a bit complicated, but that's the results LSR, SAC from within the level of LSIR and the SAC were significant at 14.58 and 31.00. That's F value. I think we'll just pass this one. It's too complicated to explain. Now, in terms of institutional adjustment, look, we measured according to disrespectful to staff, deals with contraband, severe infraction of institutional report, issue that security officer report, number of time went to segregation, and then any failure. For more information or request, please contact me at this. I will be very happy to send you any reference, and I think we have 7 minutes to go for my Zoom time to end. If you have any question, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Philandri.
Thank you very much, Prof. Loza. I noticed that we do not have much time to pose
Mr.
questions.
Philandri, I finished with my presentation. Is there any questions?
Shall we do that? Shall we deviate a bit? I know we had made other arrangements, but to accommodate the constraints of time. Do we have any question? Any question? Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I have 3 questions regarding the self-appraisal sake. So by grading offenders based on scores rather than the crime they committed, are we not opening a can of worms that will even fuel the corruption that we have in South Africa by letting perpetrators walk free, since the system lacks validity and subjectivity? When grading these offenders in terms of scores, will they not be able to cheat and manipulate the scores in order for them to be placed in a security or under an organization which they feel that they should be there or not? Thank you.
You didn't hear.
That's because there is so much echo, I can't hear your question.
Okay.
But I don't know if anybody can repeat the question without echo. I will be happy to respond.
Prof. Baki.
Okay, the question was basically because of the corruption in South Africa, would it not be easy to for offenders in South Africa to basically manipulate the SAQ? That was the question from the floor. Thank you.
understand the question, which I don't really understand it because of the echo. You are asking, is it applicable to South Africa? I will tell you there is 3 research which have been done on South African content, and we're still doing further research. We need to do research, follow-up research on released offenders. And I think Dr. Branham able to do that in the future. And I think, yes, the question can be applicable to South Africa. Excuse me if I didn't answer you because the echo is too high. You can write to me that question. You have my email in here, and I'll be very happy to answer you.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much. I think that will be very helpful. Prof. Bakhazen.
No, I just want to thank Professor Loza for his time and sharing the SAC with us, and also for with Professor Hesselink and myself, we will be talking more about SAC and using it for other types of offenders. So I just want to thank Professor Loza for his time and for agreeing to be one of the research associates in our small little criminology department. That was just that. Thank you very much, Prof. Loza.
I think now I will change to your side. Maybe I can follow you from another side. Just one sec, give me a minute. 1 minute.
Any other burning question before we snap? You send an email. Okay, thank you very much. I think on that score, we can give Prof. Dr. Loza another round of applause. Thank you very much. That is very generous. Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Professor, for your time. But without waste of time, let me ask Prof. Rafapa to come to the podium and do exactly what he was requested to perform. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you very much for listening. Take care.
Thank you so much, Professor Sithole, Professor Bakhazen. We thank you, Dr. Loza. You've been thanked. Yet, I am too minuscule to be the one to thank you. Our South African Deputy Minister in the Department of Justice and Correctional Services, Inkosi Sango Patekile Holomisa, has a word for you on behalf of all of us, Dr. Loza, Deputy Minister, Honorable Deputy Minister, MP.
Thank you, Dr. Loza. The word that I'm going to be conveying to you is somewhat longer than is made out to be, because I have to share some views on behalf of the Department of Correctional Services with the professors and lecturers that are gathered in this hall. I won't be taking too much of your time though. So, Program Director, esteemed professors of the University of Limpopo and of other universities, notably Professor Chapali and Professor or Dr. Loza, government officials led by the National Commissioner for Correctional Services, esteemed guests, students, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is a singular honor and privilege for me to be part of the discussions that are taking place at this prestigious Center of Knowledge Creation and Sharing. Its history of struggle for the liberation of the people of our land is well known. As the Department of Correctional Services, we take advantage of the fact that that struggle was intended to, among many other objectives, attain an inclusive and an Ubuntu-infused society. Our mantra as a department is that corrections is a societal responsibility, which demands all hands to be on deck, including universities. We bear the responsibility to ensure that even the most detestable and ignominious criminals and social miscreants continue to be regarded as human beings worthy of being accorded second chances in life. That is why we have programs which are aimed at rehabilitating them to become human beings who, at some stage, can be considered for release from our centers on parole or upon finishing their terms of imprisonment. Whilst 99% of those released on parole or serving their sentences under probation do comply with their conditions of release, the 1% who violate their conditions are an unacceptable blot on the great work our officials are performing, as they tend to attract the most attention of the public eye. Collaboration through partnerships with institutions of society, such as universities, is of utmost importance to the success of the work we do. Hence, the Memorandum of Understanding that we signed with the University of Limpopo earlier this morning. The skills that you have are bound to assist us and our parole boards immensely in determining who are likely to disappoint us if they are released on parole, or who will reoffend upon finishing their terms of incarceration, because we are able to read their minds. Program Director, in the period 1 March 2019 to 1 April 2022, some 99,146 offenders were released on parole. 6,417 of those parolees reoffended, committing heinous crimes such as murder, rape, robbery with aggravating circumstances, assault with intent to commit grievous bodily harm, domestic violence, and sexual assault. These statistics underline just how difficult it is to predict recidivism. The small percentage of parolees who commit highly publicized violent crimes casts a long shadow on the effectiveness of rehabilitation programs offered in our correctional centers and undermines public confidence in the parole system itself. Recidivism undermines the hard work done by case management committees and parole boards to assess the eligibility of an offender for parole, for placement on parole, a process that begins months before the offender completes the minimum detention period. I immediately took a keen interest in this year's annual spring lecture when it was brought to our attention that Professor Wegbiloza, a world-renowned researcher specializing in the risk prediction of violent and aggressive offenders, will be presenting his work on the use of a self-report measure for predicting recidivism, that is the self-appraisal questionnaire, which he calls SEC. Professor Loza must be recommended for his innovative research in the quest to find a more convenient and economical risk assessment method than the labor-intensive traditional methods that require highly qualified clinicians to administer and interpret. It is incredible that SEC can be completed in less than 30 minutes and does not require prior extensive experience of special skills to credibly and reliably interpret the results. The fact that the SEC incorporates a large proportion of dynamic risk factors and does not rely on the results of other tools or sources and can be conducted in groups makes the SEC important for developing countries, which suffer from a scarcity of PhD level clinical psychologists, criminologists, and other resources. There is conclusive evidence that the SEC is at least as effective as other well-established risk prediction measures and holds several distinct advantages over them in practice. One advantage that deserves special mention is that, as a self-report, the SEC ensures more objectivity and reduces the possibility of assessor bias. It is particularly noteworthy that the SEC has dealt with its susceptibility to the respondents' manipulation, such as lying, faking, and so on, through a built-in lie scale. Looking at a sample of the type of questions asked in the questionnaire, the simple language used makes the SEC accessible to offenders across all educational backgrounds and easily lends itself to translation into local languages to augment its accessibility. The appointment, as I've been made to understand, of Professor Laws as an associate researcher in the Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice here at the University of Limpopo is a great gain for the university, the criminal justice system, and the nation as a whole. As the Department of Correctional Services, we look forward to working with you and the university much more closer than before in our quest to decisively deal with reoffending and recidivism on the part of parolees, probationers, and ex-offenders. I thank you all.
Thank you, Deputy Minister. Another round of applause. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Just before we broke for lunch, I think there were about 2 papers that were not delivered. It was a paper by Dr. Choshi. I wonder if she's here. And also another one by Ms. Reto Rangata. Are they here? Can please show? Yes. Dr. Choshi?
She's not here.
Without ado, Ma'am Rangata, Sreto, ascend the stage. And this is a PhD student in the Department of Psychology, supervised by Professor Sodi and Professor Govender. And she'll be sharing with us some of her findings from the study, perceptions of community members in the Palale area, Limpopo province, towards water conservation, towards development of a psychological model. Over to you, Madam.
Excuse me, some vacillation, very slight, not annoying. Our Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research, Innovation and Partnerships, in her seniority, will come and thank the Deputy Minister in a whiff.
Thank you, Program Director. I think I've been hijacked many times today. Deputy Minister, it has been an honor for us to host you at the University of Limpopo. And this morning, I know we welcomed you. And we just want to thank you as well for participating in our Spring Lectures Conference. And also for this, the talk that you just delivered, although short, really was very impactful. And I think if we work together with our the university and together with the prof as well, and we can as a country provide solutions to some of the issues that we face. regarding this particular topic. So we want to, on behalf of the university, thank you. And together with your team, you've come here with a team of smiley faces that have remained the same the whole day. So we want to thank the team from the Department of Correctional Services as well for accompanying the Deputy Minister today, and some of whom are alumni of the University of Limpopo. So we also want to say to the department as well, together with the National Commissioner, with whom we've signed an MOU this morning, that we're really looking forward to having a very long and good relationship with the department, and together making a meaningful contribution towards some of the challenges that we face as a country and also as communities in South Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Over to you, ma'am.
I want to see the comments on the side. Okay, but it's fine. I'll follow them here.
Just before. And just a slight announcement here. All our dignitaries are free to depart the hall if they so wish. They're more than welcome to leave if it is possible or if it is fine with them. But otherwise, they are welcome to stay with us throughout the presentation. If they want to leave, that's okay. That's the announcement I want to make. Over to you. Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. I promise I'm going to be quick and short. My name is Linda Saretlo Rangata. I'm a PhD student at the Department of Psychology, and I'll be presenting my study, supervised by Prof. Suri and Prof. Govender. So my topic, the study was based on the perceptions of community members in the Parale area, Limpopo province, and it was their perceptions towards water conservation, towards the development of a psychological model. So as many of us would have experienced water scarcity in South Africa, either in terms of water shedding, no water at all where we stay, and you might be asking yourself, why is a psychologist or a student in psychology interested in issues of water conservation? Well, this is why. A lot of the interventions that have been developed and initiated by various departments have actually been not so successful altogether or all the time. This is because a lot of these interventions are mainly directed at persuading residents to take on new behavior, usually without considering the determinants of behavior, which are the cognitive processes, and that is where a psychologist comes in. What are the determinants of behavior? We're talking about your perception, your attitude, your thought processes, and that is where a mental health professional or expert would come in. So thus, the study sought to investigate these cognitive processes influencing water consumption behaviors. So here are the aims. So the aims of this study, like I said, was to explore the perceptions of these community members in the Palale area, and the objectives were to determine the perceptions of community members in this area regarding water conservation, to investigate what the community members in the Palale area considered to be appropriate practices to facilitate and promote water conservation. Again, to ascertain what community members in the Palale area considered to be practices that hinder water conservation. So this was a qualitative study, and it was based in Gaseleka village, one of the rural tribal settlements outside Lepalale town, Waterberg district. And a purposive sampling was used with a total of 20 participants. middle-aged and older persons from ages 43 to 60. And these participants were people who relied mostly on communal taps for water access. And the data was collected through semi-structured face-to-face interviews, and the interviews were conducted in the home languages of the participants, either in Setswana or Sepedi, and then translated by an independent language practitioner. And the data was analyzed following a thematic content analysis developed by Brown and Clark, 2006. The basic ethical considerations or issues were considered. So firstly, an ethical clearance was obtained from the university, from the TREC, and permission also was obtained from the tribal authority at Gaseleka to interview their community residents. And informed consent, anonymity, confidentiality were also adhered to. So these are some of the emerging themes. And I had, only if we had time, I had also put some accounts, participants' accounts. So in terms of the knowledge, as we can see here that not all participants understood what water conservation is. One of the participants says here, I cannot say that everybody understands what water conservation is. I think that people are only cautious and save water when it is scarce. But when it is plenty, people simply open their taps without consideration of wasting a lot of water, right? And this is the theme 2. These are some of the ways that participants consider to promote water conservation. It can be through monitoring water consumption behavior, enhancing water conservation knowledge, encouraging positive water conservation behaviors, early childhood interventions. Here we speak about incorporating the curriculum of water conservation in schools, modeling positive water conservation behaviors to our children. We also talk about, one of the sub-themes is water use behavior regulation and monitoring. We're talking about introduction of fines and some kind of methods to make people, to regulate or monitor the use of waters in communities, and also discouraging negative water behavior. The third theme, behaviors that hinder water conservation's poor habits, poor decision-making, as I've said, cognitive processes, attitude, perceptions, and beliefs about water, lack of responsibility. One of the participants says here, sometimes people say that no one can tell them anything about water conservation because no one owns water. So water is freely and it's free and in abundance, so nobody can tell anybody what to do with water. So that's one of the problematic belief or attitude towards water that hinders water conservation. So in summary, the findings suggest that there are different perceptions and experiences regarding water conservation in this community particularly. And community members consider various practices and behavior to promote conservation, as well as various factors and practices, such as negative habits, attitudes, and beliefs about water, to negatively impact or affect water conservation efforts. So here are the limitations of the study. Obviously, this study is based on only 20 on a small sample size, so it cannot be translated to represent or taken to represent the majority of people in Lephalale, right? And also, the demographics of participants, such as their educational and socioeconomic status, as well as gender, were not considered during data analysis, particularly for this study. So during the translation of data from Sepedi to English or Setswana to English, this may have led to some of the original and rich data obtained from the participants being omitted. So I'm hoping that some of these recommendations would be taken into consideration. So it's clear that there is a great need for consideration of cognitive processes, human behavior, psychological processes that motivate human behavior when developing and implementing water conservation programs and intervention. I recommend the following in the study: that psychological support be provided to communities experiencing mental health challenges as a result of dealing with and coping with water scarcity. This was one of the themes, unfortunately, for the purposes of this presentation, we didn't touch on it, that there are psychological effects of water conservation on community members. It is also recommended that the authorities should consider psychological factors when developing water management programs, strategies, and interventions, as well as consult psychology experts, mental health experts when developing such programs. Additionally, I recommend that training institutions for psychologists and healthcare providers in South Africa consider introducing the field of environmental and conservation psychology in their syllabuses. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Sretlo Rangata. Ladies and gents, you just prepare your questions, and we're going to have a panel discussion at the end. Let me take it. I want to believe that Ms. Mpahlele is here. Yes, Ms. Mpahlele, and she'll be followed by Mr. Makubela. So just have your questions. Please, no one is going to be allowed to speechify. Right? Just questions, straight into the point. Mr. Mpahlele, ascend the stage. Round of applause as he ascends the stage.
I'm not sure if I'm not really going to get through the presentation, but you can just display once again the first page. There should be these. No, it's a presentation. That's one. Let's go back again. Okay. Up here. No, no.
It's fine.
Yeah.
What again?
Can just leave it here. Can I put this one? Can I put this one here? It's not going. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kgothatso Mpahlele, and I identify as a heterosexual black man, so I don't know where the miss is coming from, but I would understand that as a technical mistake. But in any case, I should thank all the audience in the house and the conference organizers, and of course I must acknowledge the patience everyone has shown in scholarship and staying the test of time throughout the day. My question for inquiry for this spring lecture is framing femicide, and I must add femicide in South Africa. So there's a critical discourse analysis of the Sunday Times and Sowetan newspapers. Documentation or writing on femicide, particularly from the year 2019 until the year 2022. In doing this inquiry, I'm going to take no more than 15 minutes, Prof. So I'm going to be speaking into 5 discussion points that perhaps might generate a better understanding in terms of how do I intend on tackling the problem of my inquiry. Perhaps we should start from borrowing from the work of Osagia Hartman on Wayward Life, Beautiful Experiments, that traces the life of black women in Harlem in the 18th and 19th century, when she argues that every historian of the multitude, the dispossessed and subaltern, and the slave, is forced to grapple with the power and authority of the archive and the limits it sets on what can be known, whose perspective matters, and who is endowed with the gravity and authority of the historical actor. And I therefore take this as a political position to assume the responsibility, as argued in Chomsky, Powers and Prospects, that the responsibility of the writer is perhaps to act as a moral agent to bring the truth about the matters of human significance to an audience that can do something about them. And perhaps that is my stance in terms of doing this kind of inquiry. But to further argue this point is that the scholarship is done with the conviction that literary work accounts as cultural work, and since what cultural studies intend to do is to achieve in such inquiries is to understand how meaning is generated, disseminated, contested, bound up with systems of power and control, and produced from the social, the political, and the economic spheres within a particular social formation of conjuncture. At this point, I'm going to try and perhaps give a brief foregrounding of my scholarship to say where do I come from in terms of viewing first perhaps the media. So I will then want to bring to the understanding that the establishment of the media, and perhaps maybe print media in South Africa, by tracing it to let's say 1915, when the formation of NASPAS took place, which was then initially intended to be the mouthpiece of the state and push ideas on African nationalism in terms of nation consolidating in South Africa. And from this point, the phase of print media in South Africa then took a perhaps a gendered and a racial outlook, in the sense that the ownership of the media, and as far as print media is concerned at that point, became or was owned initially by white, I don't know whether to call them South Africans, because the making of South Africa as a nation state is, but yeah, but by white settlers, so to say, and who were also men to that extent. And there has been gradual transformation in terms of media ownership and perhaps control and regulation on the part of the state, since the intention was firstly to build an institution that would be able to espouse the ideas of the state. The methodological conviction that I'm coming from here is perhaps I need to highlight that I'm doing a qualitative inquiry into the media framing of femicide. This inquiry borrows the conventional methods of undertaking social research to analyze frame and context formation. The qualitative undertaking is understood as qualitative content analysis, widely used to evidence the proliferation of gender stereotypes produced and reproduced by the mass media, concentrating mostly on the dire state of underrepresentation of women in the media, as well as their objectification as limited sexual and or domestic beings. It also borrows the anti-archive approach that views the archive as a repository of violence from which we need to pull accounts on femicide to draw richer understanding of the phenomenon as a political program. And in doing so, I would purposefully, draw from the Sunday Times and Sowetan newspaper articles that are engaged with the problems of gender-based violence and femicide as an epiphenomenon. But I think I need to also try and create a link between my scholarship and perhaps the role of the state. My conviction is that the state comes into play in governance and media controls. And from the earlier conviction on the history and the foundation of the media in South Africa, one is convinced to argue on the concept of the creation of the media, or the viewing of the media as the fourth estate. Prof, turning at Okay, the viewing of the media as a fourth estate. In the interest of time, I'm going to look into the idea of frame formation. I need to declare that I also practice my craft in the visual arts. So my understanding of frame formation might be different from comrades in the linguistics and how they perhaps employ language as a framing tool to write about specific social phenomena. But my point in reference into frames comes from the idea that in practical curatorial processes, when you create say a photograph, there are particular instances where subjects in the photograph have the powers to determine what goes into the frame. So, for example, you would specifically choose where and how you'd want to be photographed. And in that way, you create, perhaps in the curatorial language, a frame formation at the determination of the subjects who appear in these frames. But also, as part of the methodological process, this inquiry will make use of newspaper archives to interrogate framing and representation, since one is of the conviction that visuals come in hand in framing subtle messages. This is an attempt to try and isolate some of the basic frameworks of understanding in our society for making sense of events and to analyze special vulnerabilities to which these frames of reference are subject to. In this inquiry, I intend to approach representation as a constructive practice capable of generating varying perspectives and perceptions which influences the social order. So I also, in this inquiry, frame femicide as perhaps a subsequent event that follows a particular social order that is informed by how we write about and how we frame and how we represent femicide as a social problem. So the idea of really looking into photographs as timeless stems of moments in human existence to trace the representation of femicides against black working class women comes from that conviction of reading the archive and reading photographs as perhaps bites that give commentary on the issues that we are dealing with as a society. Prof, I'm going to move on to perhaps the last point that I want to look at in this inquiry, which places language as a central tool in framing of femicide. And I'm going to be reading from the scholarship that has been focused on the use and importance of language. Perhaps some from the sociolinguistic scholarship into language. So the conviction is that perhaps our languages build our thoughts and is a powerful tool to describe the world. And while functional discourse analysts argue that if language use contributes to the reproduction of social life, then logically language must play a part in production and reproducing social inequalities. And from this conviction, I am also of the view that if really we need to undo violence and the work of femicide, we need to place language as a central field of inquiry in that interrogation. In this study, I propose to read into what has been written and relegated to the archive to generate alternative ways of writing about femicide that might yield a richer way of undoing. Okay, perhaps I've reiterated this. But I also move to read the influence of the media in political organizing from the premise that historically political intervention in support of popular causes effected a division between language of the politically respected bourgeoisie newspaper and that of the radical periodical pamphlets in the first half of the 19th century, which has been seen as a zenith of the published in print. So what I'm trying to argue here is to present the movement in newspaper 2 pamphlets as some of the developments that took place in terms of political organizing, to say perhaps newspapers had, at some point in time in the political field or political arena, ran out of mileage in terms of trying to mobilize abahlali towards popular causes. And in here we see the adoption of periodical pamphlets in some part of the 19th century as a form or a new reemergence of public print. My intention is to explore language is premised on the sociolinguistic scholarship that argued for the idea of using language and semiosis more generally to create spaces of anti-anticipated action by rewriting past and refiguring futures. Thanks. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mpahlele. Our apologies. You'd notice that in the program he appears as Ms. Mpahlele. I think it's a typo. We're sorry about that. Colleagues, just do as advised earlier. Yeah. And we shall have Mr. Makubele sharing with us if he's here. You could usher him to the stage by that choreography of applause. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Program Director, and I thank the audience. I promise I won't waste much of your time. I see we are running out of time, so let me get right into it. As long as I'm short, I'll be as short as I can, and I'll summarize everything. Thank you. So I'll be presenting on a study, which the title was "The Effect of Poor School Environment on Overall School Performance." Then the study is presented by Makubela MS under the supervision of Temani KM. Now, background to the study. Education is a fundamental human right. Even the Constitution is pushing that every person in South Africa must undergo formal schooling so that they can be able to read and write and become civilized and educated citizens. Now, majority of the schools in Limpopo underperform every year, year in, year out. And yet the government and yet students and scholars and all people involved in schooling, including all stakeholders, they are all investing all they could. They are giving remedial support. They are spending money in supplying schools with learning, teaching, and support materials to all the schools in South Africa. Now, accountability sessions are even stressed. Every year, all principals from schools that underperform are being held accountable. They are busy accounting, writing letters, writing RPP, writing all formal documents to give reasons as to why are their learners underperforming. Now, but something is still missing. So that's something which is still missing. This study brought what is still missing in our education system as the reconfiguring of all the schools in South Africa. Now, this study aimed at investigating the effects of school environment on the overall performance of schools and to provide strategies to reconfigure the school environment to make it an enabler of good auspicious performance. Now, the research problem was, what is the role of the school environment toward good performance and underperformance? Looking at the literature that the study perused, Muriba in 2015 produced a journal in which he mentioned that the author mentions that learners are no longer taking pride in their own schooling. And in 2022, another journal was published wherein the author makes notion that there is a disabling factor in the school environment, meaning that learners do not underperform because they are stupid. Learners do not underperform because maybe we do not have resources. Learners underperform because in the school environment, there are things that are making them not to perform to their expected standard. And other authors define school environment as the physical settings. They talk about the infrastructure. Some of them talk about the mood. Some of them talk about the climate in that area. And all of these things together, the teacher's attitudes, the learner's background, the learner's community, the classroom setting, the classroom layout, the teacher's harmony, all of these things, they make up what the authors define as the school environment. Now, the study adopted a qualitative research approach focusing on a case study design, and interviews and document analysis were part of the study. In sampling, the study sampled 5 schools, 5 principals, and this was all done through purposive sampling because we were able to detect which schools keep on underperforming from year in, year out in Mopane West Tabina Circuit. Now, the data collection process and the data analysis. The study used document analysis, observations, and also interviewed principals. But while collecting data, ethical issues were addressed. The issue of ethical clearance, the TREC certificate of clearance was issued, and from immediately the certificate was issued, the researcher began to collect data. In collecting data, letters were sent to principals in order to ask for permission to conduct the study, and furthermore, the communities in which the schools are located through their SGB were also notified that there is someone who will be conducting a research on the topic mentioned. And again, the researcher thanked the principals of the schools for agreeing to participate and also explaining to them that they are going to participate out of their own free will, and they were allowed to withdraw from the study if ever they feel that they are not comfortable. So in terms of document analysis, the document which were mostly analyzed were the Mopane West performance stats, which are released by DBE every year. Now, through this data analysis, the researcher used thematic analysis strategy, wherein data was prepared, data was collected, arranged, and then after arranging, data was compared. All the recordings were then listened to over and over and over again while transcribing what the participants were providing to the researcher. And again, the researcher made notes from the data collected, and codes were used in order to be able to arrange the data in themes and be able to describe. Now, the study made profound discoveries. Poor school environment does restrict teaching and learning. A poor school environment means will have factors which will make learners unable to perform. Number 2, communities with violence tend to spill their violence into the school environment, and that will contaminate the school environment. And again, schools have different school environments. The school environment keeps on changing year in, year out. That is why we find teachers complaining that the learners of this year are different from the learners we had 10 years ago. That is why we find principals complaining that the teachers that we have now are different from the ones we had back in the days. The reason is the school environment keeps on evolving. It keeps on changing and changing and changing. And now again, schools are not receiving enough funds and they struggle to maintain the aesthetic beauty of their infrastructure. If you look at the schools in South Africa, in Limpopo, in urban areas, in rural areas, they are different. Even in the rural areas, you find some schools are like they've been built 100 years ago, while other schools are looking like they were just built yesterday. And again, a poor school environment does not promote learner self-actualization. Overcrowded classrooms hamper teaching and learning, limited resources at schools, less physical activity resources, poor buffering systems are compromising the school environment, and also the inadequate infrastructure. We found that even in some schools, while we are still living under the post-COVID-19 pandemic era, some schools don't even have sick bay areas wherein if a member or if a learner comes in sick, they don't know where to place them. They just leave them in the classroom. Now, the recommendations by the study are as follows. The study recommends that the affected principals assist learners' performance, and they can also do this by utilizing the norms and standards as allocated per learner per school. And then also reinforcing existing security measures wherein all dilapidated buildings, you find broken fences, you find broken walls, all of them need to be strengthened. And again, refurbishing infrastructure and renovating old classrooms. The study also recommends that we provide fast speed internet and provide access to advanced technologies for both learners and teachers, because we find that in South Africa, majority of the learners will see and utilize a laptop immediately they enter into university. So this should be done also in the secondary schools at a lower level, and also involve governing bodies to assist in stabilizing the communities schools are located. You find that in a school there is a tavern playing music all night. That contaminates the school environment. And again, we maintain green spaces for outdoor therapeutic playtime, building positive relations to promote harmony, meaning teachers' attitudes towards each other also form part of the school environment. If teachers are not in harmony, that can also spill over to learners' performance and they may underperform, because you find in one school, one teacher enjoys when learners fail another teacher's subject. And we also recommend that the study also recommend the erecting of lacking infrastructure. You find that schools have got libraries, schools have got laboratories, but when you go inside, there is nothing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Makubele. That was an inspiring presentation. Throughout the presentation, I was nearly said, "Hallelujah," because I think you would make a good preacher as well. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, our question time. Doc, I'm going to ask 6 questions. If I have less, I would be very happy. Yes, Dr. Mpe.
Thank you, Chair. My question goes to Ntate Makubele. And thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation. Just short like you, indeed. So, don't you think that since, well, a school is not about principals, there are many stakeholders that can help, that can assist towards a better performance of learners. What about teachers? What about the community at large? Or parents, to be specific. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that question. I think he has noted it. Any other? Okay, so we only have one question. Mr. Makubele, over to you.
Thank you very much for the question. In the recommendations, those questions were all answered. In terms of parents, we involve the school governing body. Remember, the school governing body represents all parents at large. So we utilize the school governing body to influence the parents in the best interest of the school and the learners. Number two, in terms of teachers, we should conscientize teachers that whenever there are hurdles in their own organizations, they must resolve them as early as possible. And whenever learners are struggling in one subject, teachers must not celebrate the downfall of another teacher. They must be in unity, understanding that all of them are forming a united body, which forms the school, which forms part of the school environment, wherein we work at the best and we use all our resources and energy to advance teaching and learning and advancing our learners, since they are the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Another question? Yes, sir.
Thank you. I wanted to ask that can the absence of a father in a family contribute to a boy child being delinquent in school and also performing bad? Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe Mr. Mboweni follow up?
Thank you. Khotaso, how can we deconstruct the way we talk about the killings of females by males?
Let's give this one to Mr. Mpahlele, whilst you're still taking a break, Mr. Makubele.
Thank you very much. Let me start, and then I will hand over to my fellow compatriot here, Mr. Mpahlele. Then, can the absence of the father influence? Yes, it does. When we talk about community instability, we mean that when a father is absent, they also have a role to play in molding their children, whether male or female. Children need both parents. So when it doesn't mean father only. When one parent is absent, we will notice some trends which affect the learner's performance. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mpahlele.
Dr. Mboweni, the question is, how do we deconstruct the way we write about femicide? I think I've made a few concessions earlier to argue that first and foremost we need to understand that the terrain in which we are writing about femicide on, it's built on it's a part of a continuum of a legacy of a colonial empire. That, first and foremost for me, when I'm writing about or I'm reading about the subjectivity of specifically black people, so I acknowledge that already we're dealing with, colonial tools of writing about particular individuals. So perhaps the first argument would then be to look at how the media ownership is governed and regulated in South Africa. And we also perhaps, revoke or review the role of the state in the media and how they influence, particular freedoms about, writing about particular subjects. So perhaps, Prof, without really putting a responsibility on those who specifically write, the journalists and media individuals. I want us to look at the media holistically, and not within this particular individuals who are, of course, key players in the writing about. But I also didn't want to really comment much in terms of the language itself in which we write about as a colonial construct. I don't know how far we can entertain the idea of the language or the linguistic decolonization, to say perhaps first and foremost we need to even write in vernac news, so that if someone is in Malamulele is able to have a particular understanding of the problem of femicide in a language that they're able to access, because my understanding is that language creates barrier naturally. So the barrier is to understanding particular perceptions. And of course, Prof, perhaps the call to also look at the idea of decolonizing the ways we write about femicide is also important. I should give thanks to the remark, Prof, and the question. It's really
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Mphahlele. I saw your hand, sir.
I just wanted to ask one question on the water conservation talk. How did you quantify that the psychological effects that you reported that they were experienced by the community, they were as a direct effect of water scarcity in those communities, not of other social and other emotional issues that the community might be experiencing at that particular time when you're collecting the data?
Please rephrase. Maybe cut it into two parts. I'm losing you.
No, I wanted to find out how did you quantify the psychological effects that you said you noticed? They were as a direct effect of water scarcity in the area. They were not in any way related to some other social and emotional issues that the community might be experiencing at that particular time when you're collecting the data.
So I think it was because the study was particularly focused on water conservation. I was not exploring any other social ills or emotional challenges that they were experiencing at the time. So the focus and the question was directed about how they feel about water conservation, not necessarily anything else.
Thank you very much. That was the last question and the last comment. We're bringing this session to a close. Let's give our panelists a round of applause. Another round of applause to the audience. A round of applause to the audience. And the final biggest round of applause to the program director. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, let's meet tomorrow. Thank you.
Kilonkomo,